How's it going, everybody? My name is Christopher. Welcome to the Oosthuisen show. This is our part 2 on the episode discussing some of the behaviors that we address here at the school with our general manager, Kelly. I'll let her introduce herself again just because if you haven't seen the last episode, that way you know a little bit more about her.
Hi guys, again, like Christopher said, I am Kelly. I'm the GM here at Partners. I started here as a client about 13 years ago, started working here as a trainer about 7 years ago, and became the GM almost 3 years ago. Like I said, started as a client, so started in your shoes. I have 6 personal dogs at home, so I know a little bit about what it's like to have quite a lot of dogs. I'm a little crazy, but it's okay.
Yeah. And of course, with a lot of dogs comes a lot of responsibility, especially with us using or typically having more higher drive dogs that are a lot more, have energy and so forth. If you don't dissipate that energy properly, then that can lead to other issues, which is usually why people come to us here at the school. And a big reason on why people will come to us here at the school is for some type of reactivity towards people or towards other dogs or towards an instance or substance, whatever that may be in a particular scenario. And so I want to talk a little bit first on how to bridge the gap between a dog that might be reactive or aggressive to a person or to another dog, and how do we start making that introduction to people in that situation and that scenario, and what are the steps in order to get more of a relationship between people and their dogs.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you guys know, we preach foundation first. So first and foremost, before you do anything with your dog as far as socialization or, obviously bringing them into group situations, stuff like that, you want to make sure they have a rock solid foundation. Because if your dog doesn't listen to you when you tell them basic things like heel, sit, down, stay, come without triggers present, then there's no way they're going to listen to you with a potential trigger present.
And what is a trigger?
So like, for example, if your dog isn't a fan of other dogs, that's a trigger. Isn't a fan of like men, that's a big one. A lot of people, their dogs are afraid of men. They think they were abused, stuff like that. There's that potential trigger. Sometimes it's a noise, sometimes it's a cat, anything that you could possibly think of that could set your dog off, that's a trigger. Whatever moves your dog into an uncontrolled state of mind.
And what's the theory behind triggers? Are they, maybe situations that a dog's been in before, and so that's why they're triggered by that scenario again? Or is it purely just a chemical thing in their mind that is completely separate away from any experiences that they might have had?
I think it's both, to be honest with you. I think that a lot of times dogs, like, for example, dogs that are like insecure territorial sort of deal, where everything's scary, but you get near my house, you get near my mom, whatever, I'm gonna go, crazy and blah, 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 and act like a big dog. That stuff, you have a genetic component, probably like an innate component, and then you have a learned component. So what often happens is a dog feels something and then something happens, or a trigger or something along those lines. What I should say, it becomes a trigger. And then they think, okay, so when this is present, i.e. a dog walking down the street or something like that, I act in this manner, because the learned component becomes their response to their trigger. Did that answer your question in a roundabout way?
Yep, exactly. And that response is kind of what we call a default behavior in that specific scenario. So a default behavior can be anything from a reactivity in a negative way or even a positive way. Just like if you're driving down the road and you see a red light, your default behavior is to stop because of the learned behavior that you've progressed through in that situation. So what are the steps between a dog that is triggered by a person or another dog, and how do you get them to the point of being able to interact with that person?
Yeah, absolutely. So we start out with controlled introductions. That being said, I'll kind of go over what it looks like with people first. So what I expect our dog to do is to basically comply with everything that I'm asking. So when I have a person approaching, or if I'm approaching a person, and I have my dog's going to be at heel. They're going to sit politely. And then in every scenario, I'm going to shake that person's hand, just to kind of set up my dog for, we're going to go into a pattern behavior. So we're going to go into something that's known to you. So, and every dog's a little different. So if you have a dog that is wiggly and excited and jumps on everybody, because that's their default behavior of greeting people, people, then you're going to approach this in this way. So I'm going to shake hands with my friend, whoever's coming up saying hi, and then my happy, wiggly, excitable dog is going to sit at heel and is going to accept the petting in a polite manner. No jumping, nothing crazy. They have to maintain their sit, and then we'll obviously pet them from there. If they get up from their sit, if they try to jump or anything like that, there's going to be a correction. If they decide to sit there and maybe be a little wiggly but maintain their sit and accept the pet, accept the attention without demanding and taking attention, then that's a win for me. Say I have a dog that's nervous. My dog Maddox is a nervous dog. I have a set protocol with him, and we use this for every dog in the kennels that's maybe a little nervous of people, and we set it up the same way every single time so our dog knows what's coming next. So like for example, when I have a nervous dog, I do the exact same thing, and this is what I do. My dog's at heel, my dog sits, I shake that person's hand, I look at my dog, ask for a watch command or ask for their attention, and then I ask them, do you want to say hi? Every single time. It's a script for me. And then at this point, my dog will learn that they have two options. Either sit by my side and don't interact, or they can go up and say hi if they're feeling brave. At that point, I have freed them. So I say free, and we'll go into free later, but in this circumstance, it's do you want to say hi, and then free. And then it's my job as that dog's handler to read the signs on the dog. So if my dog looks like, oh yeah, heck yeah, I want to say hi, and like wiggly and happy and excited, I'm going to let my dog go say hi. Being careful to watch for my dog showing signals of, oh, I bit off more than I could chew.
And what happens if a dog does, so let's say two scenarios, a dog responds correctly and they go up and say hi, then we'll get into the next step after that. But what happens if they do respond incorrectly or negatively and you don't want to progress in that situation? What's the next step that you take after that?
I usually will call my dog out of the situation. So if they do something inappropriate, like turn around, like snap at them or growl at them or anything that I deem that's inappropriate in that circumstance, they're going to get a correction for it, and then I'm going to recall them back to me. The appropriate response in that respect is to stop engaging with the person that maybe is making them nervous and to come back to me and sit at heel and let me handle the situation, because I'm going to get them out of it. And by putting that pattern and repetition on the fact that I will handle the situation if it makes you uncomfortable, and I read my dog well enough to know that it makes my dog uncomfortable and I don't force the issue, it helps my dog understand that they don't have to go into the defensive mode, right? They don't have to go into that step. I'm going to handle it from there. So if my dog looks uncomfortable, I expect them to come back and show me like, hey, I'm good, and they'll come back to heel. And people are always amazed that happens, and I can tell you that I've had two dogs that have been nervous of new people. This Maddox has been most recent, and at this point, he makes that decision actively. Like, you can see it in his head. The other day, we were loading up the car. He was in the back seat. I had a friend come up, and I know him, but Maddox doesn't. And Maddox actually decided to jump out of the car, come over and sit at heel, and look to me for the next step, because he was growling inside of the car and noticeably uncomfortable of the new person. And so he came over and sat next to me and waited for me to handle the situation. Because I've patterned that behavior so much, he knew exactly what to do, and I didn't have an issue on my hand.
So a couple things there. So you've talked about what happens like in an instance where your dog is alone, say like in the car, for instance, and they're barking or growling at someone outside. Do you correct them in that instance, or do you let them, run away, or what kind of action should a person take whenever their dog is with them or separate from them and is showing inappropriate behavior?
So that's kind of a hard one. It's in the fact that you want to be able to correct behaviors as they happen. So if you know your dog has a tendency to do these things, then you're going to want to be prepared. So whether that's sitting in the back seat with the leash and collar with them, and obviously with you not being there, it's hard to control that behavior. But if you're there, if you're present, then you're going to want to correct your dog. And a lot of times when it comes to remote corrections, say like with me outside of the car, or my dog's in the way back of my car and I'm driving, or I'm in the front passenger seat or something like that, I'm on e-collar, I've got the remote, and I'm able to correct my dog. The biggest problem that people have is especially in the car, that's a big one, because you're driving, you should be paying attention to driving. So a lot of people try to give their dogs commands within the car. And it's like, for example, down. If you tell your dog down and your dog's like, you can't get me. And you're like, down, down, down. And they're like, nah, I'm good. Then you've made your down command that much less solid, if that makes sense. So it's kind of hard when it comes to reactivity for that reason.
Gotcha.
So I'd say be prepared. And if you're not, then pull over, do the best you can to be prepared. But in all honesty, like when my dog's going and there's no way I'm going to get him to stop, I ignore it for a little bit because I have no way of effectively correcting him. And then I'm making my verbal corrections obsolete if they're not working.
Okay. So now let's go into the other scenario and say your dog does respond positively and maybe they're not necessarily ready for, full play with that person or that other dog, but they're at least willing to coexist and then maybe even willing to interact a little bit. What's the step after that in order to keep, progressing that type of behavior?
Sure, absolutely. So it kind of depends on the dog. So like, for example, and I'll go at an in-between answer first. So my dog will, and I've seen this in a lot of dogs, my dog won't say hi initially sometimes. Sometimes it takes 3 repetitions of that exact behavior in order for him to be like, okay, fine, I'll say hi.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's depending on the dog. Now, for him in particular, and I'll use him as an example, real life sort of deal, I let him free once he's greeted someone. Because at that point, I trust him and because I know him. And I know that after the initial greeting, he's like the biggest love bug ever. And he's totally fine. But some other dogs are not like that. So it depends on the dog as far as the next steps. But I'd say that the more often you can give them predictability within what the expected response is, the more likelihood you'll be in that safe boat where you can continue on a socialization.
Okay. And so we've talked a little bit about introductions to people. What is different, if anything, with an introduction to a dog?
Yeah, absolutely. So the biggest thing with dogs is we set it up in a similar nature. And dogs that are nervous of other dogs or dogs that have issues with dogs, we never let them just go nose to nose. That's a big no in our book. So a lot of times what we'll start with is we'll literally start with 2 handlers, 2 dogs, 1 on each left side. We shake hands, and then that might be the first interaction that dog has face to face or up close with another dog. And that might be part of the controlled introduction with another dog. And depending on the severity of the dog, that might be where we start.
Or even before that, like just being in the same room.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's the next step after them being able to function within the same room as other dogs, is to do that controlled intro where they are in close proximity, and they are actually indirectly interacting with each other. And after that's done, then what we would do is we would pet the other dog, so pet the other person's dog. And then depending on the dog, sometimes we'll free them up and allow them to like sniff each other. In other scenarios, we'll set it up for them to be able to sniff each other's bottoms. And like we set it up that way in a purposeful manner. And depending on the dog, sometimes we have muzzle, sometimes there's a lot of different scenarios. And some dogs aren't confident enough for us to do that kind of setup. And so we'll do more of like a freed up activity where the dogs are moving around and they're able to interact with each other how they want to, as long as it's not inappropriate. Again, very, very dog specific, and that's going to be something where the more knowledge the trainer has of the dog's personality itself, the more we can try methods that would be obviously beneficial to that dog.
Okay, so what happens now if you need to make an introduction between 2 dogs, but those dogs are siblings or their brother, sister, or in case of Laurel Darren, she commented here, an old dog with a young dog, bringing them together. That's a big question that we get a lot.
Yeah.
Is an old dog that has been in the house for a long time, now they get a new puppy and it's coming in and causing a ruckus and so forth, and that obviously leads to behavioral issues. What in that regard is different in those interactions?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's, like you said, that's something we get a lot. And the biggest thing with that is some people allow their dogs to sort it out between themselves. A lot of people actually preach that. I honestly am not a huge advocate of that because I think that I should be calling the shots on my dogs. Now, my shepherd, I trust her a lot, and I do expect her to do some of it, but at the same time, I know my dog and I know what behavior looks like. So I wouldn't recommend this for people who don't understand behavior. But the biggest thing is it's not my dog's responsibility, so my older dog's responsibility to do all of the teaching. It's kind of like having, children and your oldest child is raising your younger children. That's something that obviously is not preferred. You'd rather do the parenting yourself. So that's one of the things that we have to advocate for our older dogs, as well as teach our new dogs, our puppies, what the appropriate interactions are with other dogs. So helping them read scenarios, helping them read behavior, helping them understand when they need to disengage. And we use out for that, and we can kind of go over that too. I think that's on the agenda to go over out, and I'll go over the different situations. But at the end of the day, I really think that people should be involved and really active in watching interactions between their dogs. Like as in a real world example, I know I keep going back to my dogs, but I have a lot of examples within my dogs because I have a ton of dogs. So I have a lot of border collies. The border collies are crazy. So I have 2 border collies and my shepherd. My border collie Taser and my shepherd Nessie, they play, and they do this game where Nessie pins Taser down by her neck, and like it's the best game ever, and Taser will run and she'll like throw herself down and be like, hey Nessie, get me, kind of thing, and it's definitely a game. But what happens is Taser eventually gets kind of pissed off, like, and she's like, "Wow, I'm done." And I'm like, "You were just throwing yourself in front of her, like, really?" So that's one of the things that I have to watch. And now I know when it's escalating into something that's no longer play. And because I watch the behaviors, and I've actually let it go just to kind of see what happens. And they did get into a little scuffle, and I did have to intervene quickly. And now I know, because now I know what's going to happen, that once it hits a certain point, done. And I tell them done, I have them lay down, and I get control of them quickly. Started out as a game, and then the behavior escalated into something different.
So last type of animal, and that is cats. What is anything different in terms of dogs that have cat reactivity, or even any other types of critters and so forth, which typically becomes more of a prey drive issue, and what is different in those cases, and how do we address that here at the school?
Sure, absolutely. We actually have cats who live on property, and they are very spoiled, so don't feel bad for them. And we introduce it slowly. So if we know that we have a cat issue, where it's been expressed in the home, whether they chase cats in the street or they have a cat at home that they just play too rough with, we slowly introduce the cat scenario, and we have plenty of bunnies that we can create some prey drive with and stuff like that just happen to live on property, but with cats we start in a less drive filled scenario. So like for example, we put the cat in a kennel, like a dog crate. She's used to it, she's fine, but we put her in there, and then we gauge our reaction on our dog. Now some dogs, just hearing a cat go crazy, like I've had dogs where their cat reactivity is extreme, like on a very high level, and we start working that. And if I can get my dog to work nicely around a cat in a crate, sweet, next level. The cat comes out of the crate on a leash, and then I control the interactions. Now if my dog is actually very cat aggressive, obviously I'm not going to be like, okay, let's do a butt sniff. Don't eat the kitty. But what I would actually do is I'd teach avoidance. So like if you can't make a good decision about this cat and not try to eat it for dinner, you're going to avoid it and you're going to leave it alone, because it's really none of your business. And if you can't interact in a positive manner, you don't interact. And that's kind of how we address it. Now, a lot of times we're on e-collar for something like that, because then I can create distance. Because 90% of the dogs that we train here, if they're trained on foundation, they're not going to be doing anything crazy and super naughty right at heel, right with us on them. So some of them do. Some of them, the lure of the cat is just enough for them to be like, whatever, bring it on. And that's fine. And we'll just kind of work backwards from there. But a lot of times we need to be on something that I have control of. And it's an easy correction without much input from me other than a verbal no.
Gotcha. And so a big command that we've introduced more recently here at the school, specifically with e-collar training, specifically with dogs that might have prey drive or resource guarding or some type of interaction that it helps to be kind of further away from, so that the socialization and negative association is between the thing itself, is the command called out. So explain a little bit on what out is, what it does, and why have we started using it more here at the school?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you have a dog that happens to resource guard, you're going to see out on their report cards later on in their whole camp process quite a bit. So out essentially is move away from whatever you have. Move away from that person, because a lot of dogs resource guard people, and it's possessiveness, but also they can be viewed as a resource, and it's a little bit different, but it's a very interesting distinction between the behaviors. But so we have, say, like that person, that toy, that bowl of food, that's a big one. The other dog, they sometimes brothers and sisters resource guard each other, it's quite crazy, but we use the word out for that. So the way that we teach that typically is we go through and we teach the dogs with e-collar, obviously, their working level. So we teach them that when you feel this, You're going to comply with whatever we're asking of you, and then when you're done and you've given us full compliance, the working level is going to come off. And remember, the working level on the e-collar is the lowest level the dog can possibly feel. Now, we're not talking big reactions. We're just talking like an ear flick, or they look over, or maybe it's itchy, or whatever. We look for little signs like that to find out when the dog feels it. And when we're teaching out, we're going to have a long line on the dog, so like a 30-foot leash. We'll have one person on the end of the long line, and then the other person with the e-collar giving the command of out. And sometimes that person will put pressure on the dog to move a little bit, but ideally what happens is we say out, and with the O of the out, we put pressure on the e-collar, and then the person who has the long line physically moves the dog away from the resource. So like I said in last week's episode, I think, is that the working level on the dog, so heel, sit, down, stay, come, out, they all feel the same. So that's why we use leashes as well as maybe food lures and stuff like that for directional purposes. So we teach the dog, when I say out and you feel this, you move away from that resource.
Do you combine that with like a hand signal or anything like that in order to, like, say for example, and obviously this is a very detailed anomaly for someone that might be deaf or whatever, that uses hand signals primarily, or just in general to teach that direction? Like, I know hand signals are used a lot in agility for direction-based training specifically. Would you ever combine those two? Yeah,
and actually we do that quite a bit. I think it's trainer specific too. Like oftentimes, like Melissa, one of our trainers, I find her going out and like pointing. You can see my hand. Do I have it right?
Yeah,
okay, sweet.
Yeah.
I don't know where the camera is 90% of the time. Anyways, but she'll do that. And like for the most part, from me, it's going to be body pressure where I'm saying out and I'm stepping into them. Sometimes I'll point, but 90% of the time I have an e-collar remote in my hand and I'm ready to like jump up a level if I need it or whatnot. So yes, you could add a hand signal in there very easily, but I use verbal 90% of the time.
Got it.
So yeah, out is basically whatever you've got, move away from it. We also use out in daycare. So daycare, we've implemented 4 basic commands within daycare, and out is one of them. Basically, if we see a dog that's like what we refer to as camping, so like up the other dog's butt and hanging out for a while, we tell them out. And in daycare, we don't necessarily use the e-collar long line combo. What we'll end up doing is we use basically a recall to get the dog off of that other dog, because we've obviously taught a recall on the dogs too, name recognition. So if I give a name of a dog like Daisy, out, and at that point Daisy's turning to me to look at me because I've already used name recognition to teach her when I say your name, I want ya, and then out is to move them away. So you can use it in a recall fashion too, but 90% of the time when we're dealing with dogs that have resource guarding tendencies, we want them to move away from the handler. So that's going to be directional.
So now looking at a different command, but still talking similar to resource guarding, which usually has to do with food and picking things up off the ground. Looking at the leave it command, first of all, what is different, or what is the leave it command, and then what's different between that and out?
Yeah, absolutely. So leave it is, so for example, on our training floor, we always have dog food on the training floor, whether it's us dropping it or the dog dropping it or the birds dropping it, you name it. We always have food on the floor. That can be on like walking along the street, somebody's half-eaten cheeseburger sitting there from 5 days ago. We don't want our dogs to get that, obviously. So leave it is, I see that, I see you see that, don't pick it up. Right? Out would be, so out in the instance that we're speaking of for our purposes would be move away from it. Right? Leave it, don't touch it. Out, move away from it. Done, it's already in their mouth, and get it out of there. So those are the different commands that we would use in those instances. But particularly leave it is used in group class settings, because we don't want them sniffing, we don't want them picking up bunny poop off the floor, that kind of stuff, because it's self-serving.
Gotcha.
And when we're working them in class, I want attention, and you can sniff and eat bunny poop off the ground during your free command. Otherwise, I want you to be listening to me doing what I'm asking of you.
So now looking at a dog that maybe isn't listening to you and maybe is a little bit more stubborn, what do we do for dogs that are stubborn and we're trying to work with, and how does that vary between dogs that are just lazy, basically?
Okay, so stubbornness, I'll use sit as an example, right? The dog knows sit, and they're like, nah, I'm not doing it. No, not doing it. And it's very blatantly obvious that they're like, no, basically giving you the paw, right? So in that instance, they would definitely get corrections for that. So like, for example, for sit, I'll stay on that example, but we have a 3-step process. So we make sure we have attention on the dog. We give them the command. So I say, hey, puppy, sit. If they don't do it, they get a correction with a no. If they still don't do it, we pull up on the leash and press down on the booty. So basically, I'm going to make you do it. Or we encourage them into that position in a nice way of saying it. So dogs who already know sit, and then you go to do that encourage into the position, and they're like fighting you like crazy, it's very obvious that dog is being stubborn. So we either need to find a correction that's enough for them to be like, okay, fine, I guess I'm going to listen. But also on the flip side of that, we need to be checking their motivation too. Right, so if we have a dog that's being super stubborn, being flat, who does not want to comply, who's like, nah, I'm not doing this, they're not working for us. So we need to adjust that relationship a little bit. And sometimes dogs are just like, nah, I'm not feeling it today, and that's one thing. But if I'm constantly having that, then I haven't found the right motivation on my dog yet.
And what's the best way to find that motivation?
So you're just going to keep testing stuff. So like so for example, we were talking about this last week as well for dogs that don't like food, don't like treats, don't like toys, maybe like verbal praise. We just have to keep finding something until it clicks, and you can tell where they're like, oh yeah, that was awesome, I'm gonna do that again. So you have to find that motivation, and sometimes it's about getting onto them a little bit more too, where you're more on the corrective nature of it, where you're like, no, stop, you're fine, get it done, I'm asking you to sit, not walk on fire, like come on. So it's just a matter of finding that fine tune, where it's a matter of getting onto them and holding them accountable for their actions and for the things that they already know, and making sure that you're paying them appropriately. Like if you wanted me to go push mow that lawn out there on the training field and you're like, oh, I'll give you $5. Yeah, there's no way on God's green earth that would happen. Right? I'd be like, nah, I'm good, I quit. Bye.
Same thing from a correction side. Like if you were speeding and the ticket that you got was $1, like everyone would be speeding all day long, because there would be no balance in the correction that you're giving. Yeah, absolutely.
But if you like dangled, I'm trying to think of a realistic number that would actually make me do that, $1,000, right? Push mower, nope. So like that's the thing, is maybe I would consider it for that, and maybe I would get it done in a timely manner so I could go spend my money, right? But otherwise I'm like, nah, I'm good. And it's just a matter of laziness. But if it was in my job description and that's what I got my weekly paycheck for, then my boss would probably put more pressure on me to be like, get out there and mow the lawn. So it's kind of one of those things where it's a catch-22, where you have to kind of look at the motivation behind the stubbornness, and then also how you're going to motivate them, whether it be correction or some type of different reward, and kind of go from there when it comes to stubbornness.
Gotcha. And while we're on the topic of rewards, a big reward that we do, whether it's in the middle of a training session or at the end of a training session, especially in classes, is the free command. So tell a little bit about the free command. When is it used and why do we use it?
Yeah, absolutely. So free is free, but not free for all. So like that's kind of the thing, is it's a release from the obedience command, not from being obedient. So like for example, if I have my dog in a downstay and I'm not necessarily recalling them or anything like that, I just want them to be able to get up and be a dog, I'm going to tell them free. And when you have multiple dog households, I pair their names with the word free, and they're not allowed to get up unless they've gotten that combination. So Nessie free, Taser free, and if I hadn't said their name before free, I expect them to maintain. Easier said than done.
Do you correct them then?
Yes.
If they okay?
Yeah, absolutely. So anytime they break a command, especially if I'm going to use the word no, they're going to get some type of correction. Whether or not it's a leash and collar, if I have that, e-collar, body pressure, whatever it takes at that point for me to have some type of corrective nature, I'm going to use that.
And when you're training it originally, you do it with the dog alone so that there's no discrepancy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then I start pairing their name with that regardless from the beginning, even if it's not a multiple dog home. But I just like that to be very clear, like, hey, you, I'm talking to you. And every dog knows their name, especially if you played the name game and taught them engagement with it. They should know their name. And it's just a command. People ask me all the time, well, can I change my rescue dog's name? Yeah, you do. You just basically treat it like a command. You say their name, they turn and look at you, yes, and pay them. Just like sit or down or whatever obedience command you're using. So that's kind of the thing, is I use free for that. And the biggest thing though is free, it, like I said, isn't a free for all. So if you tell your dog free and they start jumping all over you or pulling your arm out of your socket to go and say hi to that other dog or even be dog reactive or whatever, that stuff's inappropriate. You get onto them, no, absolutely not. Because it's, even if they're free, it doesn't mean that they can be total animals. And well, they are animals, but you know what I mean. Lunatics.
Can't act like it.
You can't act like an animal. You have to act like a civilized dog. So like that's kind of the thing, is like being able to correct within free, and that's why we play the free game actually. So we tell them free and then we go back to obedience. So we want them to be able to understand that even if I just freed you and you got to do your thing and have fun and whatever, If I tell you to sit or down or come or you name it, I still expect you to listen. And the more you play that game where you go between drive and control, the more control you'll have within the drive state. And usually drive is very much associated with free because it is free time. And they can do what they want, again, as long as it's not inappropriate.
Gotcha. Switching paces a little bit and talking about separation anxiety for dogs that come here, have separation anxiety to their owners or maybe to another brother or sibling, another dog in their family. What do we do in those cases, and how do we work through separation anxiety?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a question that comes up a lot. So a lot of people say, oh, my dog busts out of their crate at home. I can't crate them. They're destructive. They're this, they're that. And they worry about how we're going to contain dogs. Here's what I'll tell you. We have a couple of different areas that we can contain dogs that bust out of different, so like wire crates. We have mainly chain link kennels, but we do have, tough crates. We have even a cow pen, like literally it's for a bull. And it has a lid on it now, so like a top to it. So there's really very, very, very little chance, if not any chance, of a dog getting out of that. And even, more important, them hurting themselves on it. Yeah. So like that's kind of the thing is like we do have areas that we can put these dogs, and we do it all the time. So the biggest thing with separation anxiety is we want to make sure that we're building one foundation. Again, we preach foundation like crazy. So that's the heel, sit down, stay calm. And then confidence. We have to build confidence in these dogs because they have to remember that they have 4 feet. They're fine. Even without me, even without their brother or sister or whatnot. So we build that. We also build really, really strong crate training. Like we make sure that they're super solid in crate and they're like, yeah, whatever, no problem. And we, towards the end of these dog stays, we're doing this while we're here, while we're gone. They're in wagular, I speak good English. It's not wascally wabbit. Anyways, sorry. So
wagular, like a dog.
Wagular.
Yeah.
Wagular. Okay, that makes sense. I made sense. It's good.
Yeah.
So like for example, it was totally intentional. For example, we have different rooms within the training facility where we'll move their crates and we put them in there. And we have typically 2 things on them, right? We have e-collar for correcting inappropriate behaviors like whining or trying to bust out or anything like that. And then we have the treat and trains, which were those automatic treat dispensers that I was trying to hit him in the head with last week. And we reward good behaviors. We reward good choices with that. And then we correct inappropriate choices like barking or trying to paw at the gate or anything like that. We're asking for essentially calm on command. We want them to chill out. And even if I'm not in the room, it doesn't matter. You need to relax. You're fine. Obviously, we build up to this. We're not going to take a fresh dog that knows next to nothing and throw them in there by themselves. It's not going to happen. But at the same time, we want to make sure that we're building this slowly. And those are the tools that we're going to give these owners.
And these are not ones that we're leaving overnight. These are just while we're doing training.
Yes, absolutely, yeah. Because at that point, we've got them in an area that is secure for them overnight. So when we do leave, they've been in that pretty much the whole time. And it's while we're here that we slowly decrease the type of kennel, I guess, or the level of kennel they would be in. And so at that point, what we would do, and some dogs need like those really tough, heavy-duty kennels, and they're awesome and fantastic. And that's what they need, and that's totally fine. Other dogs like to be covered like birds. But this is something that we're going to give you as tools for your toolbox when they go home. So dogs that have separation anxiety aren't going to come into camp for 3 weeks and go home perfectly fine and be like, bye, see you later, I'll see you in 8 hours, deuces. They're not going to be that dog, right? So we're going to tell you everything that you need to know in order to carry over the training at home. Training isn't 3 weeks and done. It's never ever been like that, and it will never be like that, unfortunately. Right. If I could figure out a magic pill, I would be a very rich woman. I don't have that. But what we're going to do is we're going to give you the tools and what worked for your dog while they were here for you to continue training at home. And more often than not, dogs here get separation anxiety from either just all of us in general or like their specific trainer or whatnot. We have a dog right now that has pretty significant separation anxiety from his trainer. And she's working on that now because now he's finally displaying it, which is why our camps are so long. We want them to get comfortable. We want them to feel all the feelings they feel at home. That's why it's an overnight. That's why it's all of those things, because we want those behaviors to show up so we can work on them.
Yeah. Is it possible to address separation anxiety in like a daycare type situation?
It is hard, to be honest with you. Yeah, we'll have some of it, and like actually we have some daycare dogs that we're working on that currently, but it's more separation anxiety from each other So we can kind of work that into a program. We can do a little bit, but 90% of the time, there's just not enough consistency between here and home, honestly, for a daycare scenario to work like that. Now, dogs that need continued care and continued training, and we're still working on separation anxiety at home, maybe coming once a week or twice a week wouldn't hurt for them to obviously continue that training. But that's not something that we initially work with in daycare. It's just not something that it's going to work out in the end, really.
Gotcha. And then the last thing that I want to talk about, and then I want to talk a little bit about the equipment that we brought, is nails. So doing nails for dogs, probably 90% of them don't like their nails being cut. How do we guard against that, and how do we make sure that stays a positive experience for them, so that if they do have to go to a groomer in the future and they can't come to us, that some of that training is already done for them?
Yeah, absolutely. So most of the time, why we run into issues with dogs and their nails is they don't like their feet touched. Now, that's something that we can do as owners, especially when you're starting out with a puppy. Touch them all over, their feet, their nails, their ears, their tails, their booties, whatever you like. Touch. And if they go to bite or if they go to mouth you over it, no correction. Get onto them for it, and then make it a positive experience. So if they're making good choices and they're not going, don't touch my foot, then yes, and reward. But you basically want to start from a puppy. Okay, we adopted an older dog, or we didn't do that as a puppy, or we did that as a puppy and they still really, really hate their feet touched. That's going to be counter conditioning. That's going to be desensitizing them to me even touching their feet. And then we're going to work on, depending on the severity of the dog, we're probably on muzzle. We've probably counter conditioned the muzzle if they're really not having it and they're fine with the muzzle on. It's just an added measure of safety, just to make sure I'm not cutting and then they're coming for me and I go, oops, and I cut and I quick. We don't want to do that because that makes it way worse. So little pieces, right? And so sometimes we do 2 people with the dog, one person just shoving treats in if they're making good choices and the other person focusing on nails. Again, severity of the dog. Otherwise, we're teaching hold, clip, little tiny bit, yes, pay. If our dogs are weird about nails, maybe not bitey, but this pulling their feet back, that kind of thing. And then we teach them that it's fine, and we create a positive to it.
Now, I know you mentioned the word quick. So what is a quick for a dog?
Yeah, it's basically like, for those of you who have cut a dog's quick, very well, it bleeds a lot. So basically it's like a for lack of a better term, a vein in there. And I'm obviously not a veterinarian. But basically it's there and then the nail covers it. Is this good?
Yeah,
camera-wise?
Probably. Yeah. It's almost like kind of like the nail bed in a way. Like
kind of.
Cut that part of your finger.
Yeah.
And then I know a lot of people use, or there's a lot of products that are always out there for dogs' nails, is a Dremel. So would you recommend a Dremel instead of just a normal clipper? Yeah. Is that better for dogs that don't like it or not?
Yeah, it could be. So dog dependent. So part of it too is those Dremels get really hot. So if you have really long dog nails and you're trying to Dremel that whole thing, it gets too hot and it like actually kind of burns a little bit. So you have to be careful of that. So a lot of times you'll still tip those nails and get the majority of that big long nail off and then go to the Dremel for kind of rounding and making it shorter and getting closer to the quick. That is a slower, more gradual type of cut and more gradual type way of obviously trimming those nails. So I definitely recommend that, as long as everybody knows how to use them, because you can still quick a dog's nail with the Dremel. It's still possible.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I just want to look at some of the equipment. So these are some of the training collars that we might use or recommend using here at the school. So the first one that Kelly has up here, and I'm going to put this so you'll be able to see there exactly where to position it. I can tell. Yeah. So the first one that we have here is a martingale. So that's probably the most recommended one that we'll use for dogs and that maybe don't have a lot of behavioral issues but need something that you can communicate a correction or something to a dog.
Yeah, this is probably one of the first steps. Obviously, we're gonna go slip lead first, and I of course I didn't bring it. But basically, it's like a leash turned in on
with
itself.
this type of fabric.
Yeah, nylon.
It's like a nylon fabric, and it's just a long leash with a little loop or a eye at the end. That you can wrap it around itself and use.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a martingale. Some of the key things to note on here would be that it's half nylon, part chain, right? So you see where this chain comes, and the biggest thing with this in fit, I find a lot of people with ill-fitting martingales, and the fact that they are too large. So one of the things you want to kind of look out for, and I'm going to try not to hit my mic too much, is making sure that these D rings, you guys see this is a D, right? These should not be touching when it's on the dog. So if I'm here and I'm pulling and my collar looks like this, y'all see that? Then it's too loose. It needs to be tighter.
And for the people listening, those are the two at the end of a nylon. If you look up martingale, you'll be able to see two little rings at the end of the nylon, and then a metal kind of chain that links them two together, and then you clip your leash on the end of that metal chain, and that is what you can pull on to provide the correction and so forth that you need.
Yeah.
And so the two things that we're talking about should never connect are the two metal D-rings that are on the martingale.
The nylon portion.
Yep, the nylon.
Yeah. So you see this, I'll try to get close. That noise, that zipping noise, that's why I like the chain and nylon combo, because I need a little bit of noise there. And now some people, okay, so I have a little bit difference in opinion on this than some other trainers do, in the fact that I don't see a huge difference behaviorally from a lot of dogs between this collar, the martingale, and the training collar. I really don't, which is all chain. So a lot of people would be like, oh, if your dog is being stubborn to the martingale, move to a training collar. Yes, absolutely, you could do that. Some dogs are more responsive to it, but the biggest thing that I find is that the biggest difference between a martingale with the chain on it and the all chain training collar, the street name choke chain, that's not how we use them, but that a lot of people know them as that, is that the martingale is limited to how far it can constrict. So it only gets to a certain point as far as if I'm giving a correction or giving a tug on the collar. So dogs that have sensitive trachea, stuff like that, they're going to be on martingales. A lot of greyhounds, whippets, that kind of thing that do have those long sensitive tracheas. And next you're going to be using something that only constricts to a certain point. Now, some dogs are more sensitive to the training collars because it does constrict more, but it's really not about the constriction. It's about the noise. And as you know, that little chain noise there, it's hard to do at awkward angle.
And of course the timing and so forth,
yes,
that
absolutely,
is associated with that.
Yes, and there's an incorrect way and a correct way to put these on. Now, if your dog is at your left-hand side, which is how we train, it's a traditional heel position, it's going to be, so it like feeds, I'm horrible at this, so it like feeds in, so if
I always imagine it like a P as a partner.
I don't get that.
Really? It's the easiest thing. So if the P is facing towards you, then that's how you put it on the dog.
Yeah, I can't do it. I can't do it on my right side. I'm very special.
Our pro trainer over here is having an issue.
You know, if you had a dog in front of me, I'd be fine. It's this camera, yada. So the P, right? So the
that's correct though, yeah. Because if the dog is, let me raise it up a little bit. So, and it's going to be backwards on the camera.
Yeah.
But if the P is facing towards you, then you put that onto your dog, and that's going to be correct.
Yes. Yeah.
That's the easiest way I understand.
I don't get that. So how I do it, and like I'm kind of spatially special, so that's why I don't get it. But how I do it is, one, if it feels funky and it's not releasing, obviously there's something wrong. So like look at your collar, and now because I've been doing this for so long, I can spot them when they're on backwards from like a mile away. It's kind of funny because people are like, how did you see that? And the newer trainers are like, how did you know? I'm like, I see everything. I know. But anyways, if my dog's on my left-hand side, I know I'm crazy. If my dog's on my left-hand side and my leash is here, then you're going to look at, I'm trying to do this in a not awkward manner. So if you see this.
Yeah, of course the camera's going to have it backwards
I know,
too. So.
But either way, if my dog is on my left and this dead ring is on top, or below, I should say, like this. So you see how this looks versus this. You see how the dead ring slips? So then it's now on top versus when it was on bottom. That's how you can tell if it's on correctly or not. That's how I tell. I know I'm special, and like most people see the P thing, I don't see the P thing. So that the letter P thing. So that is what it is. But ultimately, if you're using the training collar and you're like, this feels funky, and like it's probably on wrong, and you will put it on wrong after your dog leaves camp. It's guaranteed. We will fix it for you. I swear, we'll help you. But ultimately, if it feels funky, it's probably on backwards.
So now if they're not responding to the martingale and they don't respond to the training collar, the last type of training or collar per se that we will use is the prong collar, which is what Kelly is showing here, and this is a Herb Springer, Herb Springer prong collar, metal. And you want to talk a little bit about this because that definitely looks daunting right from the scratch.
It's pretty scary looking for those, and that's the thing is like these are blunt, they're not sharp, but basically the reason that they came out with the prong collar is because it mimics kind of like a mom's correction, so like a little bite on the neck, that what Nessie does to Taser basically every day, 20 times a day. But it basically mimics that, and essentially what I refer to prong collars as is power steering. So if I have a dog, say I have a petite lady who has a gigantic mastiff, and there's no way she's going to be able to get a good honking correction on this training collar, this martingale, and we're not on e-collar, then I'm going to use a prong collar, because at the end of the day, like, I have to be able to control the dog, and some dogs just don't care about this stuff. Some dogs really are just like, whatever, bring it on. So then I'm on a prong collar, and that's okay, because I need to use what works for my dog, and I need to use what communicates to my dog. So a lot of people will be like, I don't want X, Y, or Z used, and most of the time when it comes to equipment, it's just a lack of education, and if you're using anything, any type of equipment incorrectly, then there is always a chance of injuring a dog regardless of what you're using. Like gentle leaders, I've seen those injure dogs like crazy. I've seen harnesses injure dogs. All of these things that are supposed to be like totally, they can't hurt your dog, blah blah blah. I've seen them like just rip this dog's nose to shreds because he was just pulling on it like crazy. But this piece of equipment 99% of the time is totally safe, and as long as you know how to use it and you're using it appropriately, i.e. not putting tension and loading the leash. So it's really awkward. So I'm gonna make sure that I'm giving corrections that are meaningful. And if my dog's like, whatever, I'm gonna do a bigger correction. But the biggest thing that I find people on any type of corrective or constrictive collar doing is they're loading. So they're holding constant tension on the collar and they're not releasing, so their corrections are ineffective. Because the dog never has a loose leash. So if it's always feeling constant tension, if it's always feeling a slight correction, then it's not going to care about correction anymore.
Right.
So it's really important that these are kept loose unless you're actively giving a correction. And that's a pop and release action. Leighton doesn't like it when I say pop because it sounds like you're like popping. Don't hit your dog. But like pop, release, right? So we want to make sure that we're doing that action, the flick of the wrist, right? There's a song about that. Yeah. I won't rap, I promise. But yeah, stuff like that. So like it's all a matter of using the equipment appropriately. And people will ask me, what equipment do you use on the dogs? Dog dependent. Right? Yep. So if I have a dog and they're like losing their minds over a martingale, I'm not going to put a prong on it. I'm not like, I don't need it. Yeah. But if I have a dog and I'm on a martingale, I'm on a training collar, and they're like, whatever, I don't care. Yeah. I have to use something that's going to work. I have to communicate to them, because unfortunately dogs don't reason. Like I can't sit them down and be like, okay, Fido, you're making inappropriate choices when it comes to walking along the street with other dogs. Yeah. We need to stop that, otherwise you're going to have to wear a prong collar. Like, they don't do that, right? Yeah. So I have to find a way to effectively communicate that something's inappropriate. And the way that we do that is correction. And the way that we correct our dogs is typically with some type of corrective collar.
And the other thing too that I say, because people will often ask, like, do you guys use prong collars and e-collars? And what they're saying is that they are uncomfortable with those, and they want to make sure that we're not going to be hurting their dog in any way. And usually what I say is, like, obviously it's dog dependent. Typically we'll respect your opinion on those, and if it does become something that we think will be effective, then we'll at least have that conversation with you and really highly encourage it. But if at the end of the day, if you say, under no circumstances will my dog have a prong collar on him, we're not going to like go against your opinion on that and force it onto you, force it onto your dog. We might have to have a conversation in terms of if we're the right fit for you. But at the end of the day, we're going to do what you're comfortable with. And that is also going to give your dog the best amount of success.
Yeah, absolutely. Expectation level, I think, is directly linked to that.
Yep.
And so, and that's the thing is, like, we're not going to use something on your dog that is inappropriate. And so, like, sometimes we might make a choice on maybe a particular way of working a certain behavior, and then it didn't work for your dog, and then we'll just pull out something else. Like, okay, well, that didn't work, let's try this.
Yep.
And most of the time, like, that's the thing is, like, people who are uncomfortable with equipment don't feel like they can use it effectively. And that's literally 80% of our job.
Yep.
20% dog, 80% handler. So my job is to teach you how to use this equipment in a way that helps you enjoy your life with your dog more. And that's the thing, is if you're consistent with this stuff, like, yeah, you could potentially move off of a prong collar if you do enough practice and patterning and stuff like that. Like I said, with the muzzle, like, equipment is one of those things where, you know, you hope you don't need it, but if you do, it's so nice that it's there, right? So it's like a seatbelt.
It's a tool.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the prong collar doesn't, like, you know, doesn't make your dog listen. It's how it's used, right? It's the appropriate application of the correction using the prong collar, right?
Yeah, and that is going to conclude our podcast and our show for today. That was, we've been talking for almost 50 minutes, which is probably 20 minutes longer than what we usually go. So got a lot of content, but definitely, you know, there's always things to continue to learn and continue to work on, and maybe we'll do another show with Kelly on this season. And yeah, if you guys do have any questions, definitely leave this in the comment section below. Again, you guys can find this podcast on our website at HeyLudwig.com/The Oosthuisen Show. It's also on our partnersdogs.com page under resources. And if you find us on Spotify, you can find us on iTunes Podcast, pretty much anywhere where you could listen or watch something, we're going to be there. And definitely share this with your friends, because there's a lot of things in there. Even though we were talking some of the behaviors that we'll work with at school, obviously there's a lot of golden nuggets to take out. And thank you guys so much for watching today. Thank you, Kelly, for joining us. And we will see you guys next Wednesday at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And I'm not sure exactly what we're going to talk about yet, but it's going to be good. Thank you, guys. Cheers.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
It's funny.
That was good.